Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, John, you're joining us from as the interim director of technology from the College of Medicine at Central Michigan University. And I know that you had reached out to me a little while ago asking about some program development needs from kind of maybe slightly from a technical standpoint, but it sounds like you guys have a new building, and so I'd be curious to hear more about your roles and responsibilities, and then also what's going to be developed in the near future and what your questions are.
Well, super. Thank you. I appreciate you spending some time with me. I'm quite new to the side of supporting the medical industry and specifically education. Our College of Medicine is going to open with its first cohort of students next fall. So we have a brand new building, and we do have a simulation suite that has two parallel rooms with an operations center and a debrief room. My main objective in contacting you is to get a reasonable handle on what I might expect operationally to support that facility technically. We have a highly skilled individual professional who has some years of experience on the functional side in delivering education simulation rooms. I just want to do a good job of supporting him and everybody we may bring into that facility. I'm thinking about policies and procedures. I'm thinking about what's appropriate staffing to make sure that I give a great user experience if an issue happens. Those are the sorts of things I'm looking for, Lance, so any insights you have would be very much appreciated.
So let's break that down a little bit more, because it's so important to really kind of understand specifically what the needs of the stakeholders are involved, so that you can really kind of create the programs and policies that are going to be necessary for your program in the long term and the short term. So is it just the School of Medicine that is going to be utilizing this, and if so, how many have you buy-in, and do you have a representation from various program leaders from the different departments that are going to be utilizing the space?
Yeah, so the initial plan is that we would use it primarily for our students. We're going to have groups of 100 students come through, so our first cohort is going to be a little bit smaller than that, but we expect it to stabilize and average out to be 100 per year. After some time, I am understanding that we're going to want to do some training for our local health administrators in the community. So I expect that we'll not only use it for education for our own students, there'll be some opportunity to bring in external agents to train them. So that's what I'm thinking the general use is. We definitely have a champion for this. That champion's name is Steve Vance, but beyond that, I would assume that Steve is going to reach out and identify who the appropriate folks are.
And so that's really important to offset against the space itself. And so do you know the kind of the number of rooms or types of rooms and spaces in terms of not only for staff offices, but also storage and those types of things? Has there been a breakdown of the building yet in terms of that knowledge?
Yeah, there is. I would say that some of that's evolving as we continue to take a look at our curriculum and take a look at what it is we're going to do in those first couple of years and the number of faculty that we're going to bring in. So some of that is changing, but yeah, I certainly do have a reasonable lay of the land with that building.
And so just the basics is there going to be maybe a low fidelity skills lab task trainer room with maybe not a high fidelity immersive, but and then how many high fidelity immersive rooms have you guys talked about integrating?
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand all of the terminology that you're using, but we're going to have a simulation suite, which is going to be used very much for mannequin interactions, and we're going to have wall monitors and the like. We're also going to have 12 standardized patient interaction rooms. The simulation there, not so much. Those will really be people who are actors coming in and working with our undergrads or our educational students to care for whatever part of the curriculum they need to learn there.
Okay, so a high fidelity simulation suite, meaning that fully immersive patient simulation where we're having realistic team training around a mannequin that has a lot of realistic features onto it, and then combining that with a standardized patient room, or excuse me, where we're doing real engagements there. Well, very good. I mean, it's good to kind of be able to. The first thing I would say is that by building a team early, and by building a team that is going to be representative of those stakeholders in the long run, and holding them accountable to monthly or bi-monthly meetings where everyone lays out what the initial goals of the plan will be and what the long-term goals of the plan will be. That way, what happens is that everyone's got to come together and they've got to negotiate and understand where everyone's goals are and what they are ahead of time. Because nothing is more tricky than getting all the way into building a space and then realizing that the surgery department really needed an extra room to install a certain type of piece of special equipment that unfortunately no one knew about until 2 months after the center had already opened. And as the founding director of the Clinical Simulation Center of Las Vegas, before I was ever even hired in 2009, the 3 deans from the institution that ran that were running the 3 schools for two schools of nursing, UNLV School of Nursing as well as Nevada State College School of Nursing, and then the associate dean for the School of Medicine, met with a representative from the state's Nevada System of Higher Education, as well as the building and construction designer from UNLV, which was tasked with being the host for the facility management and design and construction of the building. They had met for about 2 to 3 years, almost weekly, for several hours a week to clearly identify what the goals were going to need to be and who those stakeholders were and what their priority was going to be with regards to the operations of the building itself. And why that's so important is that if Steve is from, Steve it was, right, your simulation champion?
Sure.
If Steve is from,
yes.
say, for example, the pediatrics group, and so Steve as the champion for that group, might have an idea that they want to utilize the space 50 to 75% of the time, whereas eventually other programs such as the surgical group or other departments in terms of that student base, which you might then expand out into residence or external program development with additional contracts outside of the organization itself, where is that time going to be and how is that time going to be allocated so that not only are the scheduling priorities launched, but also what are the funding priorities in terms of ongoing needs as well as staff support. So, who's going to pay for those long-term supply purchases and costs if it ends up being that pediatrics is utilizing the space and designed to utilize the space at a 75%, well then, logically they should be, taking up a larger or reimbursing for a larger cost in terms of the supplies and the support of that staff. So those types of roles and identification are really important to do as early as possible so you can really kind of guarantee a long-term success in terms of this conversation, which is going to be starting now and continuing throughout the entire duration of the simulation program itself. It's something that doesn't ever really go away, needing to solve and configure and figure out how these spaces will be allocated and shared and scheduled and maintained and developed. I definitely recommend that during that conversation, one of the first things that needs to happen is the identification of an administrative pool that is somewhat representative of the institution as a whole. It does not have necessarily a tie-in to any particular department. That's going to help to guarantee that as you have users from different sections come into the space, that you'll have kind of a non-biased person there to help be able to schedule and manage that space in a fair way that represents the space at the end of the day and the needs of the group as a representative of that pool in terms of who's creating that allocation of space in terms of those stakeholders. So an agreement of who's in charge and how they're in charge and what the guidelines are for them is something that needs to, again, also start early and often. Otherwise, everyone will show up and start saying, well, I had it Tuesday and, there is no schedule online for other people to see and there's no policies and procedures. And this way it's going to help you to start gearing that development of some of that work initially up front. And so once those things are established, then I would recommend that, the examination of policies and procedures from other programs that are similar in the size and the scope in terms of what your group is particularly interested in would be very helpful. So not finding maybe a nursing and medical school combined and then finding their policies and procedures, but just reaching out to other simulation programs that are going to be utilizing the same type of space in terms of one high-fidelity simulation suite and a standardized patient hall. That way you can get a more aligned policies and procedures examples from them to be able to help to design some initial policies and procedures before entering into the space in terms of how scheduling will be maintained and who will have priority and what the operational procedures will be. It's very, very tricky to say that all of that can be figured out ahead of time, because the reality is it just can't. You have to kind of project, imagine, and hope that some of those things will come together beforehand. But once you start to have those staff and those users in that space and they're all engaging, the kinks or the holes in the dam will become apparent very quickly, and so there will need to be an ongoing process of kind of communication and development, especially in that first 6 months. There's going to be a lot of discussion that needs to happen on an ongoing basis in order to maintain success, including planning for meetings just to be able to continue that discussion process throughout the weeks as staff and new users of the space learn about what the issues are so that everyone can move forward. We found, for example, when we moved into the Clinical Simulation Center again in 2009, that half of the sinks weren't working, some of the lights weren't working, we didn't have desktop computers installed yet for the educators to use in the lecterns, and also it was hot because it was summer and some of the AC was not working. So, you know, there's new building issues that are just new building issues all in and all of itself. And so considering that, you know, while some people would love to just go ahead and get right into a new program and a new building, you might want to build in some time that allows for the ability to kind of get into the space and work through it and with it initially before kind of moving on to, you know, expanding that program. And so my next recommendation would be that once you've identified those stakeholders and what those needs are going to be, how do you slowly unroll all of those programs into your facilities in your space, so that not just everyone is just showing up ready to go Monday the 5th and everyone has access to everything, but instead limiting some of that ability so that or that access for that first 3 months, so that it's a slow unrolling, so that new staff, new policies, new building can all be kind of tested and experienced as it slowly starts to expand into the idea of what it was, you know, originally intended to be on. One of the problems that we had was we had 500 users all entering the space all at the same time. We just kind of left off on being able to slowly unroll that program as you move forward, so that you know, the users in the space can get better acquainted with what's going on. At UNLV, with the Nevada State College and again the School of Medicine, the difficulty was that we had 500 users all trying to occupy the space in the exact same week, and the staff had only had 1 week to move into the space itself. So it was quite tricky to have everything up and running and working. And so we started to build in a weekly meeting for the staff themselves every Monday morning to come together and start to figure out what those initial problems were that previous week and how we could start to address those needs as we went through. And really our goal for the first semester was just to survive, to get through without the building falling down and, you know, being there by the end of it, so that we could really kind of use that first term, that break term over the winter break, to kind of assess what the immediate needs were going to be in terms of the long term. So I think that's kind of touching on some of those initial needs, but, you know, then all of the discussion would probably need to go to once you've identified those stakeholders and what their goals are, it's going to be really important to kind of label and find out exactly how many hours of simulation and standardized patient that they plan on utilizing within the first semester, and then continuing beyond that into following semesters as we move forward. So stakeholders, once you've started to create a pool and a committee that will combine together, and start easier will be as you kind of move forward to not only gain support from higher levels of administration, but also operations we're going to need to be in terms of that staff itself. So I definitely recommend initially you want to consider someone for administrative needs. If you have a simulation champion who can be that program leader and wants to take on the additional responsibilities of kind of being tasked with trying to identify identify, big picture policies and procedures as well as other guides, I think that that's great, but you're still going to need somebody at the end of the day to help with scheduling and taking minutes and notes, updating a website, creating material for individuals who are planning on utilizing the space in terms of training, and then just the budgets necessary to do the supplies and ordering of equipment, maintaining of warranties, integrating and being the glue that is the connection between the students and learners possibly, but definitely the faculty or clinical educators, and combining that with the space, the equipment, any simulation technology specialists that are going to need to be there, as well as helping to develop the bigger picture with higher administration, and then initial contact for the center for just reception alone. Having the ability to have somebody there and answer the phones, you will quickly learn is definitely going to be something that's necessary on a regular basis. So that's definitely a key position that's going to help your program and immediately be set up for success that otherwise will be required of folks who, just to be honest and fair, are in a salary range that might be as much as 8 to 10 times what the salary range might be for someone working in that kind of role. So depending on, of course, who we're talking about as your administrative leader and whether or not they're a physician, educator, and or hospital administrator, those types of things. So that's really important to consider. The next really important piece to consider is once you've identified how much use of the space is really going to be started with, and I think that the best way to judge that is to look at the current simulation programs that are running and see those users that are really actually using the space, not just intending to use the space, but are using it now, and weighing it primarily off of that, but considering that additional users, once we're in a new space, will have the opportunity and potentially will become interested in utilizing it. You don't want to judge it based solely on what folks say that they're particularly interested in doing, because we found more times out of not, especially to do with a medical school, that it becomes difficult to guarantee all the times that will be necessary, especially with a residency program, that whether or not there is a learning opportunity going on at the hospital at this exact moment, or how do they build that additional simulation time into their already busy schedules. And so, I know, John, that you said you were working specifically with students, and so there's a little bit more leeway there in terms of understanding their schedules. But to make sure that that you represent those who are definitely using the space right now and considering those that are suggesting that they want to use the space, that will help you to determine how much medical simulation technology support is really necessary. And I get calls from folks all around the world, especially IT users, and they're always saying, or directors, and they're saying, well, we've spent an enormous amount of time in this new simulation building and lab, and, while we feel like we've gotten 80% of the kinks worked out, there just seems to be this ongoing 20% that just doesn't go away. And the reality is it will never go away. There's always going to be technology requirements of running a medical simulation-based program. And while the methodology is the most important thing when considering a medical simulation program, because we're utilizing a new technology and a new methodology to educate our learners by providing fully immersive experiences, really we are still ultimately talking about a center that is technology based. And so to not guarantee an IT level of support in some of those instances for the needs of our program is really kind of tying your hands behind your back before you even get a chance to show up in the room. And so my suggestion is that if the IT department of the medical school becomes aware of the initial needs of the launch of the program and is on board for kind of helping to support, because from time to time, IT departments, if they are already swamped with their own limitations in terms of what their budgets are and what their capabilities are, eventually, with the knowledge that role and responsibility will be shifted into this new position of potentially a simulation technology specialist with regards to the upkeep and the maintenance of all the computers and the software that are going to be utilized there, the first go around of debugging and computer fixing that might be necessary with regards to the space itself. That way they don't have to have somebody considered there all the time. It's fantastic, I feel, to be able to incorporate that role and those responsibilities directly into your healthcare simulation technology specialist role, so the individual in charge could also be in charge of helping to set up each scenario, before scenarios are run, as well as program the mannequin, deal with any of the audio-video requirements of running your simulations in terms of the space itself and how to get that information back and forth between one room to a debrief room or not. And so I would see that as almost as a manager level position eventually as the program continues to expand in terms of the technology and the operations of the simulation labs themselves. And we found that it was very affordable to bring on, say, student workers or volunteers or even staff who didn't necessarily have that higher level of education with regards to IT, so maybe not a BS or an MS in computer technology, but that could come in and just kind of move the labs around and change over the room itself and prepare it for the next simulation experience. But then you had this individual who was a program specialist in terms of all those needs, who could repair items, who could debug items, who could correct problems, and deal with the network and the infrastructure of the center itself on a regular basis. Now, maybe that is a person that does come from the IT department, is that that's their primary responsibility. But as a whole, your organization is definitely going to want to consider having somebody in that role as well, because if you're having your educators be the person who is setting up the room and the mannequin and the equipment and the audio-video technology, well, you're paying someone maybe twice or three times as much as someone and have access to experience that will take 10 times as long to do something that someone with an IT background or an audio video production background or digital will be able to do in 1/10 the amount of time for half of the cost. And that's because obviously there's different levels there with regards to the needs of the salary and what the training is. So it's definitely something to consider initially and ongoing with regards to your program. And I think that it's really important to be able to help maintain a long-term success for your program by utilizing what's best about each members of this team and then moving forward from there, as opposed to trying to get all this work out of just one or two volunteer individuals or champions. There's no way that becomes an efficient model in the long term. I would also recommend that with the standardized patient program, that really is completely different from running a high fidelity simulation. While there is technology involved with that, with the right systems in place, once they're established and set up, it could take a lot of time to set them up, but once they're set up, there's a little bit less immediate need to be hands-on and in control, and that can be, the operation can be run by someone maybe with a little bit less technical experience, but the experience necessary for hiring and training standardized patients who are going to be your actors and actresses in these events is not something like anything else in a simulation center. So to have a dedicated individual who knows how to work with actors and what the needs are going to be, and can also help to develop program evaluations with regards to what your different departments are looking for it. And then again, you have that scheduling component on the outside. Who's going to feed your standardized patients in the middle of the day? Are they going to have their own food? How are they going to get into the building? How are they going to, where are they going to stay? Where are they going to change into their gowns? what are the camera policies going to be with regards to recording them? All of those things definitely need to be considered. And just kind of going one step back, audio video is something that, especially with medical schools, is always kind of a tricky subject. So you're going to want to very quickly get a hold of some policies and procedures with regards to audio video management, because it's important to have documentation necessary in your policies and procedures that are handed out to learners on a regular basis, perhaps even every time that they come to the Sim Center to engage in a high fidelity experience. And you're definitely going to want one for standardized patients engagements and one for high fidelity simulation, because standardized patient engagements usually involve testing, whereas high fidelity simulation engagements usually involve a learning or teaching opportunity with regards to an immersive educational experience. And so those are two different types of audio video policies that you're going to have a group come up with and determine what the appropriate things are going to be. Some med schools have started programs only to realize that the student handbook prevented them from doing any audio video recording that the student did not want to do, and so it had to be changed in their policies and procedures just for the new students coming into the program. It took 4 years to cycle out before those users were required as admission into the school to be able to undergo audio video evaluation or performance education. So definitely something to consider initially right off the bat. I'm not quite sure where your simulation champion has it right now with your program, but now that you're expanding into a larger section with a lot more departments, definitely going to want to consider that immediately. So I think that was kind of an initial discussion of what those needs would be for a new program. You definitely want to consider the costs involved with this technology in the long run. Who's going to maintain it? What are the initial warranties going to be, and when are those warranties going to run out? Because after 3 years, usually that's when they expire. And how are you going to pay for those ongoing costs? I feel that a program, in terms of business development, is definitely a wise way to go with regards to how can you bring in external groups to help to pay for some of these items. I wouldn't recommend trying to do any of that within the first year. There's just so much going on with a new building and an expanded program and new staff that that will eat up most of your time before you're ready to really move forward with the kind of program expansion. And that's something that you want to address, though, with higher level administrators very quickly. That yes, that's something that sounds great, but does your group have the total buy-in from administrators to be able to pay for the marketing necessary? Including flyers or video production, website design. How are you going to going to conferences and other meetings that are simulation based and kind of engaging with the community there. So I think we touched on a lot of key points there, John. I do want to recommend that Michigan consider Healthy Sim Admin, which is a new 2-day broadcasted event specifically geared towards healthcare simulation program administration. We have several folks coming who are IT based and are going to be talking about the structures necessary to be successful with regards to the IT and audio video needs of centers. And then we're going to be going over things like collaborative program simulation development, as well as daily operations. And it will be beyond the scope of just myself here with my experiences at the Clinical Simulation Center for the LA Community College, and of course running healthysimulation.com. But imagine, sitting in a room with 50 other administrators, also live streaming from around the world, but then engaging with a panel that can ask questions and engage and provide 10 different perspectives, so you can really walk away with a really well and dynamic kind of experience about what's going on. And so I think, John, unless you have do you have any other questions, please feel to ask me now in the chat room. Everyone, I'd like to just take a quick opportunity to let you know about our new LinkedIn group for Healthy Simulation. So if you are are connected with LinkedIn, definitely check out our new group. We've started some new discussions there. And as well, our Twitter account for Healthy Simulation is @HealthySim. So we're going to be starting to post new content there. As well, if you're a new member to healthysimulation.com, be sure to sign up for the newsletter, which is a free best of newsletter that's sent out email each month and really helpful for the community. So John, we've answered most of your questions. I'm glad we could do that. And of course, if you have any other in the future, feel free to reach out to me. And then, so now we have some users in the room. And does anyone else have a question with regards to medical simulation? Feel free to post it into that chat room. If you have a long if you have a long question, you have my email address, lance@healthysimulation.com. Feel free to just email to me. But if you could post it in the chat room, we could definitely try to answer those questions. One thing to consider with staffing operations is the need for those folks who are going to be coming into this program to not only design their positions as they're doing their positions, but also consider the future of their position as well. So it's very tricky because even the best job description out there, and you can see a lot of examples of those at healthysimulation.com/medical-simulation-jobs, or by just clicking on the medical simulation jobs button, and you can see an example of some of the job descriptions that have been made available out there. There are still a need. Within the first year, you might have 3 revisions of the job description for those particular positions as they move forward, and that's definitely something to consider, is that you're going to want to try to find staff that maybe don't know everything about medical simulation with regards to their individual aspect, but that they're willing to show up and learn every single day something new. I think that that's really important to consider in the long run, is that you find and hire staff that are excited about learning about medical simulation and the various new opportunities that will be with regards to this position, because that way you're going to guarantee that you're working with somebody who's understanding that this is going to be an evolving process, and it's not just a stable job that has been done for years and is just being handed over those responsibilities, and here they are clearly defined, but instead that there's going to be some chaos, and that they're going to need to be working with a team, and there's going to be some stressful days that people are not sure or aware of all the answers just yet. And so trying to find those types of folks with regards to their skill sets is really helpful in the long run. Okay, we see I have some questions here. So what suggestions do you have for convincing administrators of the need for additional staffing? And so I'd say that, Bruce, that's a really great question, because I think it's really important to really consider that increased usage is increased staff. So after a while, there's only so much a staff can do as they are without the additional support. And so I would say that the best suggestion I have immediately is for you to start having your staff take a record of the types of things that they're doing throughout the week, and take a month or two and just summarize each week. At the end of the week, have each of your staff write down the number of hours that they spent in terms of particular things that they did. And so at the end of that, you'll be able to go to administration the next time that they want for an increase in usage and demonstrate that, hey, right now with this chart you can see that we've been able to perform X number of simulations with the current staff that we have. And so if you want to increase that number, then we're going to, somehow we've got to still find time to be able to do mannequin maintenance, audio video debugging and repair, scenario programming, IT-related objects and needs with regards to computers. Whatever those tasks and those responsibilities are, scheduling folks or designing new policies and procedures, all of the different job descriptions that are necessary and how much time was spent, and just demonstrate. That's a clear way to demonstrate to those administrators that an increase in that program is going to require either additional staff or the letting go of some of the responsibilities that already eat up all of the time that are being used in the center. And another suggestion that I have with regards to that immediately is how to slow roll into new staff. And so things that can be done there, I always suggest that either your hospital, your university, or your local community will have a volunteer program of some sort or another. And it has been very successful for the Clinical Simulation Center of Las Vegas to be able to bring in volunteers through a local chapter of the United Way. We put up a job description on the website. We had serious interviews with any of the candidates that applied for the position. But at this point now, for many years, we've had about 3 or 4 volunteers on staff throughout the entire week for several hours, and we've been able to utilize that additional pool of individuals to gain some, labor that was obviously at a reduced cost. We bought them lab codes who might just be interested in learning more about medical simulation, feel like they're helping in terms of healthcare in their community, and would love to dedicate 8 hours a week or 8 hours every other week with regards to a medical simulation lab. The next suggestion would be with regards to bringing in a staff part-time. And when you can clearly demonstrate that you can, the need for a staff and can just even, in off hours. So that's how we were able to secure one of our volunteers was such a great volunteer for our clinical labs that we were able to offer him a part-time position after convincing the staff that the original hired staff was not able to come in on the weekends when one of the school partners wanted to expand their program to include weekends. Well, none of us had been hired for weekend work. Okay, I think we're back. Sorry. External revenue. The more money that you bring in, you definitely want to incorporate staff to support that increase in external usage. So it looks like we're still recording it. Let's move on to the next question. Can you outline the typical roles and responsibilities found in a hospital simulation center? So Katie, I touched on that a little bit at the beginning, but Definitely want to have someone who can handle administration, and I would define administration in two different ways. There would be maybe above the line or below the line, to use one of my Hollywood terms. An above the line administrator might be involved in external program development with regards to reaching out to other communities, other programs in the community, and trying to bring in external business relationships, doing marketing, doing tours with the higher level folks, dealing with kind of a big picture budgeting, and negotiation with external contracts, also doing kind of maybe a staff supervision and policy and procedure development with regards to the various groups involved. Maybe below the line we consider administrative assistant type duties involved with scheduling, handling the phones, dealing with all the paperwork, taking minutes at meetings, dealing with the budget on kinds of regular everyday supply purchasing and requests, those types of things. Definitely want to consider that. I would, for a new program, I'd say that the administrative duties are more important initially, especially if you have some leadership, but the long-term need is definitely to have some leadership there that can guide the program and really deal with maybe the higher level requirements of it. And then my recommendation is always to have a simulation technology specialist or someone integrating directly with the technology itself, so that you can have your clinical educators or faculty focused on providing the education. Their salary ranges reflect more trying to do that, and so you can have better efficiency with regards to someone who knows technology and works for maybe an IT scale or rate, working through those processes and procedures. And then maybe someone with regards to the skills labs or standardized patient hall. It breaks out from there. If you have individual sections of a simulation program that are unique, then each one of those areas should really have a manager or someone responsible for handling all of that, because the duties will continue to expand. Our last question from Matthew: any thoughts or advice on piggybacking revenue generating uses onto a sim center used for clinical education? Matthew, absolutely. I believe that as simulation is an emerging field, that there's a lot of facilities that are just not able to afford the initial equipment or capital costs, and so there's a lot of opportunities for anyone who has already invested in that capital equipment, the room, the space, the staff, the policies, procedures, and those supplies, as well as the audio video systems and the infrastructure necessary there. So if you have a program that's already running, you should definitely start to explore local groups and see if there's other opportunities there, whether it be EMS, fire, local hospitals, other educational groups that maybe your university is not directly competing with. All of those are great avenues and places to start looking and considering your options and needs. And that's definitely one of the big key ticket items that I'm going to be talking about at Healthy Sim Admin is business revenue and generation. So we started with the local hospital at the Clinical Simulation Center of Las Vegas. We brought in a local pediatrics group and we did 1 day of training for them, made some serious money there, and then we expanded the program up until the point where we had an entire hospital sending their new staff to the center for training. So if you guys have any other questions or needs, please feel free to email me. I'll do my best to answer them. We really appreciate you guys coming out to our first webinar. We're sorry about the connection issues. We'll definitely try to figure out a better way to get a stronger connection next time. And be sure to check out Healthy Sim Admin and learn more about not only by myself, but our administrative panel that's going to be very dynamic of administrators from military simulation programs, nursing, university, and college programs, as well as state programs. So we look forward to seeing you there, and have a great week in simulation. Thanks, everyone. Let your friends know, too, about the next meetings. The webinars are going to be taking place all this month, so definitely join us for those and let others know that if this was a success for you, okay?